Good evening and a very warm welcome on behalf of Milim to this evening's presentation. I'm joining you this evening from the Greek island of Zakynthos, which is why I look slightly different to usual. Welcome to all of you wherever you are in the UK and indeed wherever you are in the world, and it's a pleasure to welcome our many international viewers. Our series of online talks and conversations continues with our guest Amir Tibon, and I'll introduce Amir to you in just a moment. Some housekeeping first. Please do ask questions. You can do this by typing whatever you'd like to ask into the Q&A facility on your screen, and as ever we'll do our best to get through as many of your questions as we can. You'll also find a chat facility on your screen, and this allows you to send a message to all of the other participants on this webinar should you wish to do so. And finally, this Milim event is being recorded. You'll find it on our website in the next couple of days. That's milim.org.uk. There are recordings of other past events there, as well as details of our future program for which you can book tickets. And so to our guest, Amir Tibon is an award-winning Israeli journalist working for the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. He previously served as the paper's diplomatic correspondent, Washington correspondent, and as a senior editor for its English edition. He's author of The Last Palestinian, The Rise and Reign of Mahmoud Abbas, co-authored with Grant Rumley, the first ever biography of the leader of the Palestinian Authority. He, his wife, and their two young daughters were evacuated from their home in Kibbutz Nahal Oz after the October the 7th attack. Amir is a regular speaker on topics associated with Israel and is author of a new book, The Gates of Gaza, a story of betrayal, survival and hope in Israel's borderland. This details his and his family's experiences on October the 7th, 2023, against the backdrop of the broader Israel-Palestinian conflict. He joins us from Mishmar HaEmek in the north of Israel. Very warm welcome to you, Amir. Nice of you to join us.
Hi, thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too, me too. So I think everybody on this webinar will remember where they were on October the 7th, 2023. Where were you, Amir?
I was at home in my community, in my Kibbutz Nahal Oz, 450 residents, a small Israeli community situated less than a kilometer from the border with Gaza, and one of the first Israeli communities to be attacked on October 7. Because of its proximity to Gaza, it was quite easy for the Hamas terrorists to reach our community in the really first minutes of the Hamas attack on that day. And it caught me and my family basically sheltering in our home, which is what we did for the next many hours until we were able to get out. And this is one of the main themes of the book. But unfortunately, in my community, on that day, out of 450 people, we had 16 murdered or killed, and 7 kidnapped into Gaza. And we still have one friend, one neighbor of mine, Omri Miran, a father of two young girls who is still held captive by Hamas this evening as we speak. It's been more than 650 days now.
At what point did you decide that you wanted to write a book about your experiences?
So October 7, late at night, we were evacuated from the kibbutz, taken out on a bus with many of our neighbors and friends. October 8, early morning, our community arrived to the place where I'm speaking from right now, kibbutz in the north central part of Israel, not very north, not close to the border with Lebanon, but more up north compared to the Gaza border area. Kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek, which has been our host community ever since they opened our gates to us on that terrible weekend. And we settled down here. It took some time. In the beginning, it was quite difficult. We lived in dorm rooms, basically. Each family received a little room for itself, and people all lived like that for more than half a year, having to share one room, small room for an entire family. Later, there were trailers, caravans brought here for families from Nahal Oz, and things improved a bit. But in the first few weeks, I couldn't even think about writing because we were just busy surviving, taking care of our family needs, of our two young children. I have two daughters who are in preschool, kindergarten ages, and it was very hectic. But around, I would say, end of November, early December, right after the first hostage deal, which took place in the last week of November 2023, and this hostage deal brought us back about 100 Israeli hostages from Hamas captivity, mostly women and children, and this included 5 women and girls from our community, from Kibbutz Nahal Oz. That's when I had a moment to breathe, and I told myself that, okay, I have to write this down because this is living history. And also it was evident, sadly, right from the beginning, that there was an effort right from the first days of the war to erase, deny, minimize, justify the atrocities of October 7. And I felt that the best thing I could do in those moments was to just sit down and write my story and the story of my family and the story of my kibbutz, my community, and in a sense, maybe I can even say my country, the story of October 7. And that's also why I wrote the book in English. This is a book that was written in English. What you are reading or hopefully already read or plan to read is the original text, and I later translated it myself into Hebrew. And it's also been published in Israel and recently won an award here in Israel about 2 weeks ago. But my first mission was to write it in English for the world, if you will, for people all over the world to read and educate themselves and connect to the story of October 7 through the story of one family, one neighborhood, one kibbutz, one community.
No, I have indeed read the book, and that's interesting that you chose to write it in English first, and impressive because it reads very well. But you must have written the book pretty quickly. You know, if you started it in November, it came out less than a year after the events. How long did it actually take you to complete the book?
So I started writing in early December 2023, and when I had something to show, I reached out to potential publishers, and Little Brown and Company in the US was the first publisher to decide to go with this story. But right from the beginning, they told me this would have to be on a very tight deadline. And they explained that they wanted this published before the 1-year mark of October 7, which to me always made sense because this was the time that the book was most likely to make an impact and draw attention and sell copies and get readership. And also I feared that if we wait, there will be the US election in November 2024. And after that, who knows what's going to happen in the world. And I wasn't wrong, apparently. So it was always on a tight deadline. I started in December, and I had to basically turn in the manuscript by June 2024. So I had 7 months to write the book, then 2 more months of editing, and it was ready. It was ready to come out in September of 2024.
Impressive. But you're a journalist, Amir, and this is different, isn't it? Because you're not reporting something from a distance. You are the subject of your writing, you and your family. How is that different for you as a writer?
The methods of writing were the same, even though the story is very personal. I had to conduct research and interview people and collect documents for both parts of the book. And I use the word parts because it's the best one I can use, but it's not 100% accurate. Basically, the book has two, I will say, timelines that run in parallel. There's the timeline of October 7 that begins at 6:29 a.m. when the first barrage of mortars is launched from Gaza toward our neighborhood. And the second timeline is the historical timeline, the one that follows the history of Kibbutz Nahal Oz since its foundation in the 1950s. And through the story of the kibbutz, what really I tried to do was to tell the history of Israel and Gaza and the relationship between these two entities and the people, the Israelis and the Palestinians. And so for both of these timelines, and the way the book is built, you have one chapter on October 7, and then you have a history chapter about a specific period in time, and then another October 7 chapter and another history chapter. It goes back and forth. But for each of these chapters, for each of these stories, I had to conduct research. I had to interview people and collect documents and compare testimonies. And so the methods of working were the same journalistic methods I would use for any article, for my previous book, for any book I would hopefully write in the future. Emotionally, it was difficult because I was writing about my own family's experience, about the stories of my own neighbors and friends, some of whom were murdered, some of whom were kidnapped, others who survived, like my family, but went through a terrible trauma. The story of my parents and the rescue mission that they embarked on from Tel Aviv to come to the kibbutz and save us and other people. The stories of the soldiers and the police fighters and the local security team of the kibbutz and the battles that they fought on that day in and around Nahal Oz. And then also the larger political story, but always keeping in mind the people at the end of that story. Because the chapters that deal with the history, they feature all the names you would expect to see there: Netanyahu and Sharon and Rabin and Arafat and Abu Mazen and Sinwar and Bush and Obama and Trump. But these chapters at the end of the day also reach the people at the end of the story, the residents of Kibbutz Nahal Oz, the people living on the border, and how all these big decisions impact their lives. So this was for me another journalistic project, no different than any other piece of writing. But of course, I had to deal more with my own feelings and emotions because of how close to home this is.
Now you detail many failures, military failures, political failures that allowed the attacks to happen. From your perspective, what's the most shocking? What's the most unforgivable failure you uncovered?
At the end of the day, for me, October 7 is about one thing: the lack of troops, the lack of military forces in sufficient numbers along the border with Gaza. On that morning, you had maybe 400, maybe 500 soldiers across the entire Gaza border. And when Hamas breached the border at 30 different points, you simply didn't have enough soldiers on the ground to protect all the communities and all the military bases and the young people at the Nova Party. And many of the soldiers who were on the ground fought heroically, and many of them lost their lives trying to protect others, but there simply weren't enough of them. And now you ask yourself, why weren't there enough soldiers? And this opens up many different boxes with different answers. There is an intelligence failure. There was just an assumption that this border was quiet. There was a political diplomatic failure because there was an effort to reach deals with Hamas in order to weaken the Palestinian Authority. And so again, there was this misconception that with Hamas, we were making deals and we didn't need to worry about this border. There was a true lack of soldiers on a national level, which is a problem that still exists in Israel today. Our military isn't large enough for all the purposes and all the missions and all the adventures that it is asked to fulfill. And there are other failures as well that the book contains, and others that didn't make it into the book because they will only be exposed and revealed with time as more documents become available. But at the end of the day, this is the story. And the book also shows you the negative picture, the opposite of it. It shows you the impact, for example, that a very small group of fighters had inside Kibbutz Nahal Oz. I write, especially the 5th chapter of the book details the battle that took place inside the kibbutz. A very small group of defenders, a mixture of a little police force that was stationed near the kibbutz and the local security team, and how they held up and saved many families. And when people read that chapter, I always ask them to ask themselves two questions in their mind. What would have happened in my specific kibbutz if instead of 15, such defenders, you had 50, 50? And what would have happened if you had that number of defenders in each and every one of those border communities? And we Israelis have to ask that question of the current government and demand answers.
Do you feel Israel's ready to confront these failures?
Israeli society definitely is. The government is not. The government is trying to avoid such a discussion. And actually, the government today is in the midst of a campaign to minimize and make people forget October 7. They would like people to remember the great victories against Iran and the achievements against Hezbollah. They don't want people to remember October 7 because it's embarrassing for them, right? It's the biggest failure in the history of the country. So, ironically, the victims of October 7 have to contend, on the one hand, with an effort stemming outside of Israel to minimize and deny what happened. And on the other hand, with a government here in Israel that also wants people to forget what happened, although for completely different reasons, right? The deniers and the minimizers in the UK, for example, are often hostile to Israel and anti-Semitic and hateful of us. Whereas here in Israel, this is a government that supposedly out of patriotic arguments would like people to forget October 7 because we should focus on the great victories. And we even had people in the government call October 7 a miracle because it woke us up and led to those supposedly great victories. So this is a very strange situation that we have to deal with.
In terms of the people you spoke to, one of our viewers, Francis Ronald Berry, asks, did you only interview Israelis for your book?
I mostly interviewed Israelis, and this is a book written by an Israeli Zionist journalist. I did consult with some experts about the history of Gaza who are not Israeli, Palestinian and American and French writers and scholars, and they were very helpful, and I thank some of them in the acknowledgements part of the book. They were very helpful in my effort to be as accurate as possible in writing about the history of Israel and Gaza. So that was definitely helpful. But yes, apart from those people who I mentioned, the vast majority of those interviewed in the book are Israelis. This is an Israeli book written from the Zionist perspective. And I always am interested in reading the perspective of the other side, and I read constantly about what is happening in Gaza, and I try to educate myself all the time about how these events are viewed from the other side. But I can only write the story that I can write. And this is a story of an Israeli kibbutz, of an Israeli community, of a Zionist stronghold. That is Kibbutz Nahal Oz, which is at the heart of my book.
Now, the book's called The Gates of Gaza. What's behind the title? How did you come across this title?
The Gates of Gaza is, I would say, a double reference. First of all, it's a reference to an iconic speech given in the graveyard, in the cemetery of Kibbutz Nahal Oz in 1956 by Moshe Dayan, arguably the most famous general in Israeli history. And he came in April 1956 to a funeral that took place in the kibbutz. Back then, this was a very small kibbutz, very young, just founded a few years earlier. And one of its young founders, a 22-year-old man, Ro'i Rutberg, was killed by Egyptian soldiers on the border. And in his eulogy for the young Ro'i, Moshe Dayan spoke about the young people at Kibbutz Nahal Oz carrying the gates of Gaza, the heavy gates of Gaza, on their shoulders. And this is one of the most famous speeches in Israeli history. And I write about it in the book. And I am a bit proud to say that I bring the real story behind that speech, because there are different versions of the speech. Some parts were later erased from the record. Read the second chapter of the book and you will find out what happened. But the speech itself is a reference to a biblical story, the story of Samson, one of the heroes of the Israelites during the Bible, who, according to what is written in the Holy Book, carried the gates of the city of Gaza on his shoulders after the Philistines in Gaza tried to kidnap him. And later, by the way, the Philistines in Gaza managed to capture Samson with the help of Delilah, as we all know, and took him as a hostage into Gaza and held him there in chains and tortured him until, with the help of God, he managed to collapse the city onto itself and brought a disaster on the Philistines and also on himself with the famous words, Tamut nafshi im plishtim, let my soul die with the Philistines. So all of this is very symbolic if you consider the events of today. But when I chose that title, I was basically referring to the two instances of the gates of the city being mentioned, the Dayan speech and the story of Samson, and any other symbolic elements that were attached to it later, that, I think only proved to me that this was the right title for the book.
You say in the book the gates weighing even more heavily on our souls. What do you mean by that?
This is the last sentence, basically, of the book.
Mm.
And I don't think I can explain it to someone who hasn't read it. And I know you've read it, Jonathan, but maybe some in the audience haven't yet.
So they need to read it. Okay, maybe it's not a fair
to understand
question.
why I wrote that, you really need to read. But yes, I believe that all of these events, all of the tragedy and pain and suffering of the last 22 months now, since October 7, and on and on and on, as this war goes on forever, will weigh very heavily on our souls for many, many years to come.
Mm. Now, you're quite critical in the book of the Israeli government and Netanyahu in particular. Some might say that it's not appropriate to criticize while the country's at war. How do you respond to that?
I think it is the most appropriate thing to do, because if the government failed us and led us into this terrible war, a war that we all would have preferred to avoid, because we paid such a heavy price during this war. We lost so many people, and we keep losing people. Today we have a young soldier killed and another few injured in another incident in Gaza. We all would have preferred to avoid this. And during the history of different democratic nations, times of war often are also times when you criticize the government. Sometimes you change the government, right? In the UK, you have a famous example of a government that failed and was then replaced during a war, right? World War II, Neville Chamberlain had to step down and vacate his seat in order to have somebody else run the war effort. And I think in historical perspective, as we are now in the 22nd month of this war, and we still have hostages in Gaza, and we still have soldiers dying there, a lot of historians will ask, would it have been better for Israel if this government, the October 7th government, would have stepped down earlier in the war and made room for someone else to run the war effort and to run the international relationships that are meant to support Israel at times of war, and to really unite the people instead of dividing them all the time, which is what this government is doing. And even just an example from today, from the headlines of today, Israel still lacks thousands of soldiers. The IDF is thousands of soldiers short, while its missions only continue to grow, because now we are facing a difficult situation in Syria. We almost got involved in a conflict with the new government there a few days ago. So we need thousands of more soldiers. And this government, instead of doing everything it can to recruit more young people, is doing the opposite. It's in the midst of a huge political effort to pass a law exempting thousands of healthy young men from military service because they belong to a specific group within Israel, the ultra-Orthodox Jewish population, and their rabbis, their religious leaders, don't want their young men to serve in the army. So the government is doing everything to exempt them because it relies on the ultra-Orthodox parties to remain in power. How is this helping us shorten the war and reach victory? It's the exact opposite. So I don't see any problem with exercising my rights and my duties really as an Israeli citizen, as a journalist, as someone who was there on October 7 and saw the results of this gross mismanagement. I feel it's truly my commitment to write this down and explain it and say it like it really is.
So you've got issues with recruitment, with management. In terms of the response in Gaza, are you comfortable with what's been done? Or if not, what else would you have liked to see happen?
I think that the war in Gaza could have been ended many, many months ago in a deal to return all the hostages, not in bits and pieces and 10 here and 5 there, but one big comprehensive deal, bring back all the hostages, end the war, and leverage the reconstruction of Gaza, because Gaza is completely destroyed. Leverage the reconstruction against Hamas giving up power and giving up arms. This is the best way to pressure Hamas. In 2014, and I write about this in the book, we actually had a similar opportunity. 2014, there was a 2-month-long war between Israel and Hamas, Operation Protective Edge, it was called. And at the end of it, instead of applying economic pressure on Hamas and promising amazing and expansive reconstruction in Gaza, but only in return for concessions from Hamas, the Netanyahu government did the opposite. They decided to give the keys to reconstructing Gaza to the Qatari government and create this arrangement with Hamas of cash and cement in return for quiet. And this is what led to October 7th. And what we're doing today is, instead of bringing back all the hostages, bringing our soldiers out of those death traps that Hamas has created for them in Gaza, because most of our young soldiers today are dying in homes that are booby-trapped. They're dying in old military vehicles that are not equipped for this kind of urban guerrilla warfare. They're dying in small ambushes in the destroyed rubble of Gaza. So we can bring back all the hostages, we can take our soldiers out of there, and then we can basically tell Hamas and tell the people of Gaza, you can have a great future. We can rebuild everything here with the support of Saudi Arabia and Egypt and the United Arab Emirates and also the Palestinian Authority. And this can be a wonderful place. But Hamas has to give up power and has to give up arms. And if they don't do it, there will not be reconstruction. By the way, not because Israel will stop the reconstruction, because no country will put any money into it. Which government in the world today will put money into reconstructing Gaza, knowing that Hamas remains in power? It will be setting your own money on fire. Because if Hamas remains in power, the next war with Israel is simply a question of time. Is it 1 year, 2 years, 5 years? It doesn't really matter. Everything you build will be destroyed again in the next war. The only way to convince these countries to rebuild Gaza is if Hamas agrees to give up power and give up arms. It can be a gradual process. It will not happen in a day. But with the right use of diplomacy, with the right use of economic leverage, we can make it happen. Instead, what we are doing is we are getting bogged down, drowning in the mud, in the swamp of Gaza, losing soldiers, losing hostages, killing many, many civilians, destroying our country's international reputation, losing friendships and support all over the world. I don't see the strategic purpose that this is serving at the current moment.
Very interesting. Maybe some of our viewers might want to question you further on that. There's a very strong line in the book. You say there are no leaders in the land these days. In their place are psychopaths and egomaniacs. This is quite strong. I mean, you're referring, I imagine, to Netanyahu, but are you talking about the whole political class here?
This is not aimed at any one person. This is a sad description of the leadership, not just on the Israeli side, also on the Palestinian side. I mean, look, the fact that this is going on for so long and with so much human suffering, okay, what does it tell you? This is not good for the Israeli people. This is not good for the Palestinian people. And if you had real leaders, you could have stopped it a long time ago. And as much as I'm critical of Netanyahu, if you read my previous book about Mahmoud Abbas, you will find out I'm not a big fan of him either. And I wrote that book together with my friend Grant Rumley, an expert and a researcher from the Washington Institute. And in that book, we describe a man who began his political career with real ambition and a sense of purpose and a desire to do things differently, and ended, well, he's still there. He's not willing to end it, but will end up spending almost 2 decades as basically a corrupt and useless dictator. So that's one piece of the puzzle. And we haven't even talked about Sinwar and all the Hamas leaders who are really psychopaths and bloodthirsty people. So yes, there is a crisis of leadership in this land on both sides, the Israelis and the Palestinians, and this is why we are in such a terrible, painful, frustrating situation.
Well, certainly in Gaza, but there have been successes. Hezbollah has pretty much been removed as a danger. Syria is, well, maybe becoming a threat again, but certainly has been removed as a threat for
It's a different kind of threat.
A different kind of threat.
I don't. Mhm. Yeah,
Iran has been dealt a blow and has been unable to retaliate so far. So these surely are viewed as successes. No.
In Israel, I think most people consider the wars against Hezbollah and Iran as successful wars, and the one in Gaza not so much. I wrote a column about this a few months ago. This was before Iran. It was mostly about Lebanon, but I believe it's also true for Iran. And what I wrote there basically is that we saw two wars, the one that Israel prepared for and the one that Israel didn't prepare for. Because the war against Hezbollah, Israel has been preparing for it ever since the Second Lebanon War in July 2006. Basically, next year it will be 20, but 19 years ago. That war was a bit of a wake-up call, if you will. And so Israel put so many resources, so much effort into preparing for the next war with Hezbollah. And when that war came, in the first almost year of it, actually, it was very difficult because Hezbollah was targeting all of the communities on the north. The entire Galilee was evacuated from people, and we were losing civilians and soldiers, and Hezbollah was firing and surprising us with drones. But then over a period of several weeks in August and September last year, you saw the war that Israel had prepared for, and it was executed very well. And 3 months later, late November 2024, you had a ceasefire that is still holding until now. It's important to say Hezbollah has not been removed as a threat. Hezbollah still has thousands of rockets and drones that can be used against Israel. Hezbollah still has thousands of soldiers that are loyal to the organization. It's been weakened, but it's not over in any means, and we should remember that this is the kind of music we would hear about Hamas a few years before October 7th. Oh, they've been decimated, they're so weak, they're afraid of us. I write about all this in the book. So I would urge caution with regards to Hezbollah, but still, what you saw in Lebanon was a war that Israel had prepared for and put a lot of intelligence resources into, and then executed with a clear plan and with an exit strategy. Because in Lebanon, we did not chase Hezbollah until the last tunnel, the last rocket, and the last fighter. We at some point said, okay, these are the achievements we reached. If we keep chasing the last fighter and the last rocket, we will be stuck in the mud for many, many months, and we will lose hundreds of more soldiers. Now we pull out. With Iran, you saw something very similar. A plan that was done over the course of many years with excellent intelligence, executed over a period of 12 days, and then we stopped. And again, we could have said, no, we keep going until the last missile launcher is destroyed, and until we find the missing 400 kilograms of uranium, and until we kill the last commander of the Revolutionary Guards. But we didn't, partly because of American pressure, but also because it wouldn't have made sense, because the entire country was shut down for 2 weeks. People were all at home with their kids in the shelters. People were dying. And there was a strategic decision for an exit strategy. This is what we don't have in Gaza, which is a war that we clearly didn't prepare for and has been badly executed for the last 22 months. And the government basically doesn't have a plan apart from chasing the last Hamasnik in the last tunnel with the last gun. This is what we're doing.
We've got some questions from some of our audience. Gillian Friedman says, well, do you think that Hamas will agree to returning hostages if Israel agrees to a full ceasefire and rebuilding program? You do.
It's very easy to put it to the test. Israel should make the offer. All the hostages in return for end of war. If Hamas says yes, great, we get all the hostages. If they say no, we will have a very strong imperative to continue the war, and it will be much more supported internally and internationally. The problem today is that we're seeing the opposite. Hamas is saying, we want one comprehensive deal, all the hostages in return for ending the war, and Netanyahu is refusing. Netanyahu says, no, I only want a partial deal, 60 days, 10 hostages, and then we continue the war. So of course we are losing international support, because the hostages from day one of this war, they were the main reason that countries stood behind Israel. People said it is unacceptable for a terror organization to kidnap people from their beds and from a music festival. And it was clear that until Hamas releases the hostages in a reasonable deal, Israel will have to keep fighting. But today the tables have been turned. And instead of Israel being the one saying, give all the hostages and the war is over, our government is the one saying, no, no, let's do a temporary deal for only partial release of the hostages. And I keep writing and saying, let's put it to the test. I personally believe, yes, such a deal will work.
And they can be trusted as a partner who will.
If they don't release all the hostages, then the war will continue. That's the terms of the deal. It's not about trust. It's about execution. It's either they give the hostages as part of the deal.
Isn't this understood, though? Isn't this clear that if the hostages are released, the war is over?
No, not to the Netanyahu government. They say, and Netanyahu says this on the record, listen, don't trust me. Listen to what he says publicly. He says, if they give up the hostages, we're still going to keep fighting. This is where everything is stuck. Now, the Trump administration, what they're trying to do is build some kind of a bridge proposal that says, okay, 60-day ceasefire, half of the hostages released, and during the 60 days, we'll negotiate an end of war agreement and get all the other hostages back. What this means is that half of the hostages, even after a deal is signed, will remain in the hands of Hamas for at least 2 more months after the deal has been signed. And this is purely a Netanyahu insistence, because he says, I'm not going to end the war. I'm going to renew it after 60 days unless Hamas agrees to imaginary conditions. They basically surrender all of them and they all get out of Gaza, and they allow Israel to carry out the Trump plan, which is to get 1 million people from Gaza to go somewhere else. They're never going to agree to this. So this is where things have been stuck for many, many months now. And I say, yes, let's put it to the test. If they refuse to sign such a deal, Israel will be in a much better position internally and internationally until Hamas agrees.
Very interesting. We've got a question here from Gillian Tober. She says, I've heard a view from an Israeli who claims to be close to Israeli intelligence, who says that the military purposely stayed away on October 7 until they had established that the attack was not a ruse to distract from a larger planned attack from other borders. What's your view of this?
First of all, I love this Israeli who is close to intelligence, because you have to know Israelis, everybody knows somebody. And also Israel is a country of 9 million epidemiologists, 10 million strategic experts, about 4 or 5 million Iran experts, although only maybe 100 or 200,000 Israelis speak Farsi, but every taxi driver is knowledgeable about the real Mossad plans of Iran and what is happening now in Lebanon, and they get it on their Telegram channel. So it's important to be aware of this phenomenon in our wonderful country. But I think what happened on October 7 is that the military didn't have enough soldiers on the ground on the Gaza border, and that when the attack began, strategically there was a huge concern about the north. And a lot of forces and a lot of resources were immediately pushed up north out of fear that Hamas was coordinated with Hezbollah, and that this would be like the Yom Kippur War in 73 from both directions. eventually we learned that Hamas was not coordinated with Hezbollah, and in fact, Sinwar hid the date and the time of October 7th from the Hezbollah leadership because he believed Hezbollah had been completely infiltrated by Israeli intelligence, and he was right. His fear was that if the date of the attack will be known in Beirut and in Tehran, it will also be known in Tel Aviv. And that the only way to successfully execute his evil, psychopathic plan was to keep it a secret only known in the tunnels of Gaza among the Hamas leadership. But we had no way of knowing this on the morning of October 7th. So yes, a lot of forces were immediately, and Air Force planes and everything, sent up north. And it took hours for everybody to understand that nothing really was happening on the north. The events on the north began only on October 8th. And meanwhile, we needed every soldier we could get down to Gaza. And this was part of the, again, many, many failures of October 7th. But not an intentional failure, a human error of gigantic proportion.
Have you been back to Nahal Oz?
I go almost every week. I was there yesterday.
How is it? Are people moving back, or is it being reconstructed?
So the kibbutz is being rebuilt and reconstructed, and there is a lot of work still happening now, almost 2 years later. I can tell you my own home has been completely fixed. Yesterday, when I was there, they finally closed all the bullet marks on the exterior walls of the house. And today the house looks brand new. Inside, outside, beautiful. Now we are working on the garden. There is work to do in the garden. There's a lot of work happening around in the kibbutz. Streets are being dug out and infrastructure is being replaced. In terms of people going back to live there, today I would say 15% of the population is already back living in the kibbutz. I think this figure will grow to about 40 or 50% by the end of the summer, but it will only go to the higher numbers of 70, 80% once the war is over. A lot of people, especially young families with kids, don't want to go back into the war reality that we are experiencing right now. And when I go there, it's hard to describe, but you hear and you smell and you see everything that is happening in Gaza, all the explosions, on the gunfire. When there is an event with soldiers being killed, you know by the amount of noise and by the helicopters coming to rescue the wounded. It's a very difficult situation for young families. And this is another reason why I've been saying loud and clear, it's time to end this war. Bring Omri Miran back to his family, bring all the hostages back to their families, and start focusing on the rebuilding of these communities, the reconstruction of them, the healing, the fixing. This is what we need. And I believe that when this happens, Nahal Oz will go back to more than 80% of the population returning.
And what about the Palestinians? Is it still possible to have peace with Palestinians, or has that ship sailed?
I don't think we should be talking about peace right now. It's not realistic. And the level of hatred and desire for revenge on both sides of this conflict are the highest they've ever been, because we are living in a continued trauma. And as long as there are hostages in Gaza, our trauma continues. October 7 is not over. And the trauma on the Palestinian side is also huge, because people are dying every day and living in terrible conditions. And we can say it's the blame of Hamas. I personally share that perspective. I think Hamas is to blame for everything that is happening right now eventually. But that is not going to change the fact that people are suffering, that this will impact their views of Israel for many years. Having said all that, we are also students of history. When my book came out last year, it was first published in English and in Hebrew. I translated it myself, but then a German edition and a French edition were also published. by talented translators and wonderful publishers in those two countries. And I went on a small promotion tour in Europe. And I thought about it, 100 years ago, France and Germany had a series of wars that cost the lives of millions of people. And today, when you travel from Paris to Berlin to promote a book, you don't even need to show your passport, right? There's no border, basically. It's like crossing between two villages in the English countryside, if you will.
So when you say you want to build a better future for your daughters, how do you see that? How do you see that happening?
Right now, I think the focus has to be on rebuilding Israeli society, first of all, because this entire event was born out of the biggest crisis in the history of Israel internally, the social crisis brought about by the extremist agenda of this government and by its attempt to rewrite the rules of the game and change the constitutional order of Israel. And we need to fix our own society. We need to fix all the kibbutzim and the towns that were damaged because of this war. We need to rebuild the army, have more soldiers, and have more faith and trust. And yes, down the road, we will also have to seek better relationships with our neighbors, but this will take some time. Let's be honest about it. Look what's happening in Syria right now. The fall of the Assad regime, everybody said it was going to open up great opportunities for Israel, and maybe it will in the future, but right now it's also creating great challenges and potential risks. We worry still for the stability of Egypt and Jordan, our neighbors. Gaza has to be changed. The situation in the West Bank is very, very alarming and concerning. And in Lebanon, we have, like you said, created a different reality with a much weaker Hezbollah, but a weaker enemy is often an enemy that plans its revenge. I want to believe in peace, and I think we will have it one day. But right now, we have to be a little more humble and modest in our goals for the future.
Well, Barbara Kultas says, how about going into politics yourself? Is that something you've been asked before? Not for you.
No, not my thing. But I appreciate every opportunity to speak and share my views and say my truth. And I think it is an important thing to have dialogue, especially with people around the world who are interested in Israel and care about our country and care about our part of the world.
So this is book number 2. Anything else in the pipeline? Do you have something else planned?
I love the word pipeline because I do have an idea for a book and it involves actually an oil pipeline, but I won't say anything more because then I will be revealing my own plans. But yes, I'm working on something.
Well, if and when it's ready, do come and tell us all about it. Amir, it's been a real pleasure to chat with you this evening. Amir's book is available from all good bookshops. If I wasn't on holiday, I'd hold up my copy and show you, but it was too heavy to put in the bookcase with all the put in the suitcase with all the other books I had to bring with me. It's a harrowing read, but the background and the perspective, the political perspective Amir brings, is very, very interesting. Now we're back in a couple of weeks with a story about Myra Hess. She was a musician, remarkable lady, came to the UK as a refugee and gave concerts in London as a classical concert pianist. That's on the 4th of August. For more details of our future programme, visit our website at milim.org.uk and sign up to our newsletter to make sure you don't miss anything. All of our online events are free, but you can make a donation to help with our costs. There's a link in the chat or visit our website. It remains for me to thank our guest, Amir Tibon, once again. Thank you so much, Amir. It's been a real pleasure to chat to you. And
my honor and pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. And looking forward to seeing you all next time. Until then, stay safe. See you soon.